The gleaming metallic corridors of Thalaxis accordion buzzed with a nervous energy that Leon Vallis found distinctly unsettling. Diplomats, officials, and representatives from across the Galactic Alliance hurried past, their faces etched with concern. Tensions between the ancient rival species, the warrior-like Severus Syndicate and the ethereal Jelkai Accord, had reached levels not seen in centuries, and today's Reconciliation Summit was perhaps the last hope for avoiding interstellar conflict. "Just remember your place," Vallis, Chief Translator Moreau, had told him earlier that morning, not bothering to mask her condescension. "Your backup. Keep your head down, stay quiet, and pray we don't need you." Leon had nodded meekly, accustomed to such treatment. At 34, he was a Level 2 translator, specializing in symbolic communication and ancient cultural traditions. Respectable, but hardly the caliber expected for high-stakes diplomatic negotiations. His presence here was mere protocol, a box to be checked. The real work would be handled by Senior Translator Park, with her flawless credentials and impressive list of successful mediation efforts. Leon adjusted his plain gray uniform, the subtle blue translator's emblem on his collar, feeling oddly heavy today. He took his assigned position in the secondary observation booth, just close enough to watch, but far enough to remain invisible. From here, he had a perfect view of the Grand Council chamber, where representatives of both species were beginning to take their positions. The Sever delegates entered first, tall, avian humanoids with iridescent plumage that caught the light as they moved. Their ceremonial armor glinted with the symbolic markings of their various warrior houses, and their eyes, sharp, golden, and predatory, surveyed the room with unconcealed suspicion. Their culture revolved around a complex warrior faith that valued honor above all else, even survival. Minutes later, the Jelkai arrived. Where the Severa were solid and imposing, the Jelkai were nebulous, vaguely humanoid beings composed of luminescent fog that shifted and swirled within the confines of their containment suits. The ancient mist beings communicated through pulses of light and color that represented one of the oldest thought systems in the known galaxy. Their very existence was a living philosophy, every movement laden with meaning. The two species had been locked in a blood feud for millennia, their conflict rooted in religious and cultural differences so profound that most mediators had long given up hope for reconciliation, which is why the neutral human alliance had been chosen as translators. Humans possessed a unique capacity for nonlinear symbolic thinking and cultural adaptability that made them ideal intermediaries for species that could barely comprehend each other's existence. Leon knew all this from his studies, of course. He'd written his doctoral thesis on comparative symbolic structures in non-humanoid communication. But theory and practice were worlds apart, and he was acutely aware that his presence here was a mere formality. "I'm just here to translate," he whispered to himself, a mantra he'd repeated throughout his career whenever anxiety threatened to overwhelm him. "Not to save the world." His comm device chirped, a message from the translation team's coordinator. He read it with growing alarm. Asterisk urgent. Translator Park experiencing severe language allergy reaction. Report to main chamber immediately. "You're up, Vallis." Asterisk. Language allergies were rare but serious. Neurorejection symptoms that occurred when a translator's mind encountered incompatible linguistic patterns. Park must have been exposed to something unexpectedly toxic in the preliminary exchanges. Leon's heart hammered against his ribs as he gathered his materials and headed for the main chamber. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't prepared. He wasn't qualified. But there was no one else with his specific expertise available on short notice. By the time he reached the translation booth, the proceedings had already begun. The chief protocol officer gave him a worried glance, but quickly ushered him to the central terminal where the sophisticated translation systems awaited his guidance. The machine could handle basic linguistic conversion, but the cultural nuances, the symbolic undertones, the historical connotations, those required human touch. "Commence Universal Translation Protocol," Leon said, his voice steadier than he expected as he initiated the system. The first hour passed without incident. The Sever Supreme Commander delivered a formal greeting, filled with traditional warrior honor references that Leon carefully filtered through appropriate cultural contexts. The Jelkai elder responded with a mist dance of shifting colors that Leon interpreted through the symbolic equivalence algorithms he'd helped design during his postgraduate work. But then came a statement that would change everything. The Jelkai representative pulsed a complex pattern of azure and violet light that registered in Leon's translation feed. Following protocol, he converted the communication. The Jelkai Accord extends cosmic harmony to the noble several lineages. We acknowledge the pain of past conflicts and seek the path of mutual existence beyond the shadow of the Soul Egg dispute. The chamber went deathly silent. Every Severa representative stiffened, their plumage flaring in what Leon immediately recognized as a display of supreme offense. The Supreme Commander rose, taloned hands clenched. "Translate again," he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Precisely." Leon frantically reviewed the pattern sequence, double-checking his interpretation. There was nothing overtly provocative in the Jelkai's statement, yet the Severa were reacting as though they'd been issued a death threat. And then he saw it, a subtle variation in the light pattern's tertiary sequence, a slight shift in luminosity that the automated system had failed to capture. In standard translation, it seemed innocuous, but in the ancient Severa war dialect, beyond the shadow of the Soul Egg, could be interpreted as a threat to destroy the sacred reproductive chambers where Severa's spiritual essences were preserved for reincarnation. The ultimate blasphemy. "There appears to be a translation error," Leon announced, heart racing. "Please allow me to clarify the intent of the Honorable Jelkai Elder." The next few minutes were a desperate scramble as Leon attempted to salvage the situation, explaining the linguistic misunderstanding while simultaneously trying to soothe the increasingly agitated Severa delegation. But as he worked, he noticed something odd, patterns in the symbolic exchanges that didn't quite align with standard diplomatic protocol. The Severa assistant, an erudite scholar named Terex, who stood beside the Supreme Commander, was subtly signaling through feather positions and eye movements that didn't match the commander's official statements. Similarly, there were irregular patterns in the Jelkai's color emissions, discrepancies so slight that only someone with Leon's specific expertise would notice. These weren't random variations. They were coded messages being passed outside the official translation channels. Leon began marking these anomalies in his terminal, compiling a separate transcript as the negotiations continued. On the surface, both delegations appeared to be working toward reconciliation, with flowery statements about peace and mutual respect. But beneath that veneer, encoded in cultural symbolism and ritualistic gestures, was a different conversation entirely. One filled with provocations, historical grievances, and thinly veiled threats. Someone was deliberately sabotaging the peace talks. During a brief recess, Leon slipped away to examine the translation systems more closely. In a maintenance access area behind the main chamber, he discovered a small device attached to the primary symbolic reference database, something that could subtly alter the light spectrum perception of the translation feeds, causing the Jelkai's color-based communications to be misinterpreted by anyone viewing them through the system. "What are you doing back here, Translator Valis?" Leon turned to find Eli Namari, representative of the Namari Union, a supposedly neutral commercial coalition that had offered to host next year's trade summit. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just checking the systems," Leon replied, casually positioning himself to block the device from view. "We had some irregularities in the translation feeds." "How conscientious of you," she said, "especially for a backup translator. I'd have thought such matters would be beneath your qualification level." "I take my responsibilities seriously, Representative Namari." She nodded, still smiling that cold smile. "As do we all. Don't let me keep you from your duties. Though I would caution against overstepping. Translation is a precise art, and one shouldn't read too much into things. Wouldn't you agree?" After she left, Leon carefully removed the device and secured it in his pocket. His mind raced with implications. The Namari Union had always positioned themselves as impartial facilitators of interstellar commerce, but their territories bordered both Sevra and Jelkai space. They stood to gain significant economic and political advantages if the ancient rivals remained divided, or better yet, if they descended into open conflict. Back in the translation booth, Leon faced a moral dilemma that had never been covered in his training. His job was to translate, accurately, neutrally, without personal interpretation or agenda. That was the sacred trust of the translator corps. But if he simply translated what was being said, including the hidden provocations, he would be facilitating a war that would cost billions of lives. He remembered his old professor, Dr. Eliana Chun, who had once told him, "Translation isn't just about words, Leon. It's about choosing how the world understands each other." The summit reconvened, tension thick in the air. Leon made his decision. He would not be merely passive, not when lives hung in the balance. He created a modified translation protocol, one that would allow him to subtly counter the provocations while maintaining the appearance of neutrality. When a Sevra representative made statements containing coded threats, Leon translated them without the threatening subtext. When the Jelkai elders' light patterns included deliberate cultural slights, Leon rendered them as respectful acknowledgments instead. All the while, he meticulously documented the actual communications, building a case to expose whoever was behind the sabotage. The afternoon session proved increasingly difficult. Both delegations seemed confused by the unexpected civility in each other's responses, and Leon noticed Terex, the Sevra assistant, exchanging concerned glances with a junior member of the Namari delegation. His suspicions deepened. During the final session of the day, Leon implemented the second phase of his plan. He introduced a false translation, not to provoke, but to flush out the saboteurs. He translated a standard Jelkai statement about cultural preservation as a subtle reference to a shared historical connection between Sevra and Jelkai ancestors, something he knew would cause whoever was manipulating the proceedings to show their hand. The reaction was immediate. Both Terex and 3 members of the Namari delegation stiffened visibly, and urgent messages began flowing through their communication channels. Leon discreetly accessed these transmissions through his translation terminal, creating a multi-layered analysis that revealed patterns of collusion. What he discovered was worse than he'd imagined. The Namari Union had spent years secretly cultivating assets within both the Sevra and Jelkai hierarchies, exploiting ancient hatreds and religious differences. Their ultimate goal was not merely to prevent reconciliation, but to engineer a controlled conflict that would force both species to rely on Namari territories as neutral trade zones and military buffers, essentially giving the Union unprecedented economic and strategic power. It was elegant, ruthless, and it had almost worked. Leon was compiling the final pieces of evidence when the door to his translation booth slid open. A maintenance technician entered, but Leon immediately noticed the man's hands. They were too smooth for someone who worked with equipment daily. And there was something in his expression, a cold calculation that didn't belong on a technician's face. "System check," the man said, moving toward Leon's terminal. "We've detected some irregularities." "I haven't reported any," Leon replied, subtly activating the booth's security protocols. "Who authorized this check?" Instead of answering, the man lunged forward, producing a neural disruptor from beneath his uniform. Leon barely managed to dodge, the energy beam grazing his shoulder instead of hitting his head. Searing pain shot through his body, but adrenaline kept him moving. The false technician was between Leon and the door, but there was another option. The translation booth was connected directly to the main chamber through a sound-insulated window and communication system. In a desperate move, Leon slammed his hand on the emergency override, dropping the privacy shield that separated his booth from the council chamber. All eyes turned to the sudden commotion as Leon grappled with his attacker. The man got another strike, this time with a concealed blade that sliced deeply across Leon's chest. Blood immediately soaked through his translator's uniform, but Leon had one advantage: desperation. With a surge of strength, he managed to shove his attacker against the translation terminal. The impact activated the holographic projection system. Suddenly, The evidence Leon had been compiling appeared above the council table. Intercepted communications, analysis of the sabotage translations, recordings of secret meetings between Namari officials and their assets in both delegations. This summit has been deliberately sabotaged. Leon shouted through the pain, his voice carried by the chamber's amplification system. The Namari Union has been manipulating both delegations, engineering a conflict for their own profit. Chaos erupted in the council chamber. Security personnel rushed in, surrounding the shocked Namari delegation. The Sever commander seized Terex, whose treachery was now exposed for all to see. The Jelkai pulsed with colors of outrage and betrayal. The false technician made one last desperate attempt, lunging at Leon with his blade. This time, however, the weapon never reached its target. The Jelkai elder had extended a tendril of mist through the open barrier, enveloping the attacker and holding him immobile. Translator Valis speaks truth. The elder's colors pulsed, now directly visible to everyone in the chamber without technological intermediaries. We have been played against each other by those who would profit from our suffering. The Sever Supreme Commander stepped forward, his warriors' posture rigid with controlled fury. For millennia, we have fought a war that has served only others. No more. He turned to Leon, who was now barely able to stand, blood streaming from his wounds. You have honored the true warrior's code, to fight not for glory, but for justice. Leon's vision began to blur. The translation terminal before him swam in and out of focus. He had just enough strength left to activate the final protocol, a complete data package sent to the Human Alliance headquarters, ensuring the evidence would survive regardless of what happened next. I just came to translate, he managed to say before collapsing. When Leon regained consciousness, he was in the medical bay of Thalax's Accordium. The first face he saw was that of Chief Translator Moreau, her expression a mixture of concern and something he'd never seen directed at him before, respect. You're going to be all right, Valis, she said, her usual curtness softened. The Jelkai healers worked on you themselves. Apparently, you've become something of a priority patient. The summit, Leon asked, his voice hoarse. Continuing, believe it or not. After your dramatic intervention, both the Sevra and Jelkai delegations insisted on proceeding. They've agreed to a preliminary non-aggression pact, while a full investigation into the Namari Union's activities is conducted. And the Namari? Moreau's expression hardened. The senior officials are claiming ignorance, of course, blaming rogue elements within their organization. But your evidence was quite thorough. The Alliance Council has suspended their trading privileges pending further action. She hesitated, then added, they're calling it the Translators' Accord now, a new set of protocols to protect cultural and linguistic integrity against manipulation. Your name's being mentioned quite a lot in the draft document. Leon tried to sit up, wincing at the pain that shot through his chest. Easy, Moreau cautioned. You've got at least another day of recovery before you're cleared for duty. Duty? Leon asked, surprised. You mean I'm not being dismissed for violating neutrality protocols? She actually laughed at that. Dismissed? Valis, they've renamed the main council chamber after you. The Valis Hall will be holding its first official reconciliation ceremony tomorrow. And they've specifically requested you to be there, if you're well enough. The next day, still weak but determined, Leon stood at the entrance to what had indeed been renamed Valis Hall. His uniform had been replaced, the blue translator's emblem now accompanied by a silver distinction mark he didn't recognize. It's the symbol of truth between words, explained a voice beside him. Leon turned to find the Jelkai elder, his mist form shimmering with calm blue tones. An ancient honor among my people, rarely bestowed upon outsiders. I was just doing my job, Leon said. No, the elder's colors pulsed gently. You chose to do far more than your job. You chose to understand the true meaning of translation, not merely to convey words, but to protect the integrity of understanding itself. Inside the hall, representatives of both the Sevra and Jelkai waited. As Leon entered, they rose as one. The avian warriors and mist philosophers united in an unprecedented show of respect. The applause began softly, then grew to fill the vast chamber, expressed in diverse ways. The beating of wings from the Sevra, the harmonious light pulses of the Jelkai, and the traditional hand-clapping of the human delegates. Leon Vallis walked through the center of the hall, his translator's documents still clutched in one hand, his uniform still stained with his own blood. He had arrived as nothing more than a backup translator. Insignificant, invisible, expected only to relay the words of others. He was leaving as something else entirely. The man who had prevented a war by understanding that sometimes the most important words are those left unspoken. In the weeks that followed, the Translators' Accord would become the foundation for a new era of interspecies communication, with safeguards against manipulation and protocols for cultural verification. The Namari Union would face sanctions and restructuring, its attempt to engineer conflict ultimately leading to greater unity among the species it had tried to divide. And Leon Vallis, once a mere Level 2 translator overshadowed by his more prestigious colleagues, would find himself appointed as the first director of the newly established Institute for Cultural Integrity, a position created specifically to ensure that no one would ever again attempt to use language as a weapon of mass destruction. Years later, when asked by a student about the events at Thalaxis Accordium, Leon would simply smile and say, "I just went there to translate." But sometimes, translation means more than just repeating words. Sometimes, it means choosing how the universe understands itself. The student would then inevitably ask about the famous imagery, the translator exiting the council chamber, covered in blood yet surrounded by acclaim. And Leon would answer with the same words he had spoken in that pivotal moment, when he stood between war and peace, between manipulation and truth. "I just came to translate." But both he and the universe knew that he had done far more than that. In a galaxy where words could kindle wars or forge peace, Leon Vallis had proven that a single person, armed with nothing but understanding and courage, could change the course of history. For in the end, he hadn't merely translated languages. He had translated truth itself.